Welcome to Serial Killers with Ben Carter. I'm your host, Ben Carter. The summer of 1929 in Düsseldorf, Germany, was an eerily hot one. A sweltering heat wave had taken hold of the city, but the weather wasn't what made the citizens shudder. It was the presence of an unseen terror, a shadow lurking in the corners of their collective consciousness. The name Peter Kürten was beginning to seep into the city's lexicon, spoken in hushed tones, with fear etched deeply into every syllable. Peter Kürten, known in the annals of criminal history as the Vampire of Düsseldorf, was a man whose monstrous actions would cast a long, dark shadow over the city. He was a man who derived pleasure from the pain and fear of others, a man who viewed the act of taking life as an intoxication that he could not resist. Before his reign of terror, Kürten lived an unremarkable life. Born into a poverty-stricken and abusive household in 1883, he was the third of 13 children. His father, a heavy drinker with a violent streak, often subjected his wife and children to brutal physical abuse. These early experiences would lay the foundation for Kürten's future deviance, a twisted path that would lead to a chilling series of atrocities that would grip Düsseldorf in a state of abject fear. From a young age, Kürten demonstrated a disturbing fascination with violence. This fascination was not limited to humans. He often tortured and killed animals, a well-documented precursor to many serial killers. As he grew older, his violent tendencies escalated, evolving into a dark obsession that would come to define his life. Kürten's crimes were gruesome, the result of a mind that saw violence as a form of pleasure. His victims, often young women and children, were subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The nickname Vampire of Düsseldorf was not just a sensationalist moniker, it was a hauntingly accurate description of a man who found exhilaration in bloodshed. The investigation into Kürten's crimes was a complex and painstaking endeavor. The police force, struggling to keep up with his wave of violence, was left grappling with a chilling mosaic of brutality that seemed to defy comprehension. Each crime scene was a testament to Kürten's sadistic tendencies, a chilling tableau of his monstrous psyche. Yet in the midst of this reign of terror, Kürten remained an enigma. Despite his violent acts, he managed to maintain a veneer of normalcy, blending into the crowd as just another citizen of Düsseldorf. It was this ability to hide in plain sight that made him all the more terrifying, a wolf lurking amongst the sheep. The story of Peter Kürten is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul. His crimes, a grim testament to the depths of depravity that a mind can sink into, continue to cast a haunting shadow over the annals of criminal history. And so, the name Peter Kürten remains deeply etched into the memory of Düsseldorf, a chilling reminder of the summer of 1929 when a monster walked its streets. Set against the backdrop of the burgeoning industrial city of Düsseldorf, Germany, in the late 1920s, the tale of Peter Kürten takes on an even more sinister tone. It was a time of dramatic change and uncertainty. The aftermath of the First World War had left the country economically devastated and politically unstable. The Weimar Republic, a democratic government established after the war, struggled to maintain control as economic woes, political extremism, and social unrest threatened to tear the nation apart. Amid this chaos, Düsseldorf, with its steel and metal industries, was a city on the rise, a beacon of hope and prosperity amidst the turmoil. The city itself was a study in contrasts. The old town, or Altstadt, with its narrow cobbled streets and quaint timber-framed houses, was a testament to Düsseldorf's rich history. Meanwhile, the modern industrialized areas were abuzz with the clatter of machinery and the hum of progress. The population was a melting pot of factory workers, businessmen, artists, and immigrants, all striving for a better future. But beneath this veneer of hope and prosperity lurked a dark underbelly. Düsseldorf was plagued by crime, poverty, and social inequality. The streets, filled with beggars and vagabonds, were a stark reminder of the hardships many faced. The nightlife was equally seedy, with brothels and bars catering to the basest desires of society's underclass. It was in these shadows that Kürten operated, exploiting the vulnerability and desperation of his victims. The social climate of the time also played a role in Kürten's reign of terror. The late 1920s were marked by a pervading sense of dread and anxiety. The fragility of the Weimar Republic, coupled with the rapid pace of social and technological change, created a climate of unease. It was a society on the brink, and Kürten, with his brutal acts of violence, only added to the sense of impending doom. In this world of stark contrasts and simmering tensions, Kürten was able to blend in, operating under the radar while committing his heinous acts. The city of Düsseldorf, with its mix of old-world charm and modern industry, its hope for the future and despair from the past, became a chilling stage for Kürten's ghastly performance, the setting for a horror story that was all too real. Kürten's victims were as diverse as the city of Düsseldorf itself, a chilling reflection of the city's many faces. His first known victim was Christine Klein, an 8-year-old girl who was found assaulted and murdered in her home in 1913. Kürten, then a 20-year-old, had committed the crime on a family visit to his hometown of Mülheim am Rhein. This horrifying act marked the beginning of his string of violent crimes. However, it wasn't until 1929 that Kürten's killing spree, one that would earn him the moniker the Vampire of Düsseldorf, truly began. Between February and November of that year, Kürten would leave the city in a state of terror as he committed a series of murders and assaults that seemed to lack any discernible pattern. His victims ranged in age and status. They were men, women, and children, affluent citizens and those living on society's fringes. They were people like Rosa Oliger, a 5-year-old girl, and Maria Hahn, a 45-year-old woman. Both were brutally assaulted and murdered, their bodies left in deserted locations. Then there were the survivors, those who bore the physical and psychological scars of their encounters with Kürten. Gertrude Schulte, a young woman who was attacked on a dimly lit street but managed to escape. She described Kürten as a polite, well-dressed man who struck without warning. There were also instances such as that of Maria Budlik, a young runaway who narrowly escaped death. Budlik had arrived in Düsseldorf hoping to find work, but instead found herself at the mercy of Kürten. He lured her into the Grafenberger woods under the pretense of offering her a place to stay, only to attempt to strangle her. Budlik managed to talk Kürten out of killing her, a testament to the frightening unpredictability of his attacks. These initial events marked the beginning of Kürten's reign of terror, each crime adding to the mounting dread that gripped Düsseldorf. His ability to blend into the crowd, to appear as just another face in the bustling city, allowed him to carry out his violent acts undetected. And as news of the attack spread, so too did the fear, the city's vibrant streets now tainted with an undercurrent of unease. The people of Düsseldorf, once hopeful for the future, were now living in the shadow of a predator. As Kürten's reign of terror grew, so did the intensity of his crimes. He seemed to be escalating, his violence growing more brutal, his attacks more frequent. The city was descending into a state of terror, each new crime a chilling reminder of the predator that lurked amongst them. Yet, it was the seemingly random nature of Kürten's crimes that bewildered law enforcement. There was no discernible pattern to the victims he chose, no clear motive behind his attacks. He targeted both genders, all ages, and various social classes. This lack of consistent modus operandi left investigators grappling for leads, struggling to build a profile of the man they were hunting. Despite the challenges they faced, the police were relentless in their pursuit. They launched one of the most extensive manhunts in German history, deploying over 1,000 police officers and even enlisting the help of the civilian population. Checkpoints were established, houses were searched, and potential suspects were questioned. The city was under a virtual lockdown, the authorities desperate to catch the man who was turning Düsseldorf into a city of fear. In a bid to understand the mind of the murderer, the police turned to the emerging field of forensic psychology. They consulted with prominent criminologists and psychiatrists, among them Dr. Karl Berg. His pioneering work on the psychology of serial killers would later become instrumental in understanding Kürten's twisted psyche. Even with these efforts, the police were unable to make significant headway. Kürten, who seemed to revel in the fear and chaos he was causing, began to taunt the authorities. He sent letters to the police and local newspapers, detailing his crimes and promising more to come. He even left clues at his crime scenes, a macabre game of cat and mouse that only served to heighten the public's fear. Despite the rising panic, there were those who refused to be intimidated. Among them was Maria Budlik, the young runaway who had managed to escape Kürten's clutches. She came forward to the police, offering a detailed account of her encounter with the man who had tried to kill her. Her description of Kürten as a well-dressed, polite individual who struck without warning was eerily similar to that given by Gertrude Schulte, another of his survivors. These testimonies provided valuable insights into Kürten's predatory behavior and, for the first time, gave the investigators a glimpse of the man they were hunting. The hunt was on, and the police were determined to catch the Vampire of Düsseldorf. As the hunt intensified, Kürten remained elusive, his identity hidden behind a facade of normalcy. To his neighbors, he was an ordinary man, albeit somewhat aloof. He was a man of routine, going to work at a factory during the day and returning home to his wife in the evening. But beneath this veneer of respectability lurked a darkness that was beginning to emerge in his criminal profile. As the testimonies of survivors like Maria Budlik and Gertrude Schulte were analyzed, behavioral patterns began to emerge. Kürten was charming and well-spoken, traits that he used to disarm his victims before attacking them. He was also meticulous, often planning his crimes in advance and carefully selecting his victims. This level of premeditation suggested a high degree of intelligence and cunning. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Kürten's profile was his apparent pleasure in killing. His letters to the police and newspapers were filled with lurid descriptions of his crimes, betraying a sadistic enjoyment of violence. This was a man who killed not just for the thrill of it, but for the sheer pleasure of inflicting pain and terror. Criminologists and psychiatrists working on the case began to piece together a psychological profile of the killer. Kürten was diagnosed as a sexual psychopath with sadistic tendencies. His violent acts, they concluded, were driven by a perverse sexual gratification. Dr. Carl Berg, the psychiatrist who would later interview Kürten extensively, described him as a man who was devoid of any moral sense of guilt or remorse. Meanwhile, the police were faced with the daunting task of narrowing down their pool of suspects. Thousands of men were questioned and hundreds were arrested, but Kürten remained at large. His ability to blend into society, coupled with his cunning and manipulative nature, made him an elusive target. The investigation faced another setback when a man named Stausberg was arrested and confessed to some of the murders. While he was unable to provide details of the crimes that only the real killer would know, his confession sowed doubt among the police and the public. However, the true killer was still at large, leaving a trail of terror in his wake, and his reign of terror was far from over. The tide began to turn in the spring of 1930, when a trail of forensic evidence finally led investigators to Peter Kürten. A series of breakthroughs began with the discovery of a handkerchief near the scene of the latest murder. The handkerchief was monogrammed with the initials PK. The police turned to the nascent field of forensic science, specifically fingerprint analysis, hoping it might help them link the handkerchief to a suspect. The science was still in its infancy, but it had already proven its worth in several high-profile cases. Kürten's prints were not yet in the system, but the handkerchief provided a tangible link to the killer that investigators desperately needed. Meanwhile, Kürten continued his rampage, his crimes growing increasingly violent and erratic. He seemed to revel in the fear and chaos he was creating, continuing to send letters to the police and newspapers detailing his horrific acts. But his audacity also led to mistakes. In May 1930, Kürten attacked and stabbed a young woman named Maria Buchholz. Unlike his previous victims, Maria survived the attack and was able to provide a detailed description of her assailant. Her testimony marked the first time the police had an eyewitness account of the killer. The breakthrough came when Kürten's neighbor, a man named Peter Müller, grew suspicious of Kürten's behavior. He reported his suspicions to the police, who then brought Kürten in for questioning. Kürten, ever the cunning manipulator, initially managed to deflect suspicion. But when his wife, Auguste, discovered the bloody handkerchief and a bag containing a knife and other incriminating items, she turned them over to the police. The handkerchief matched the one found at a murder scene. The knife, when examined, contained traces of blood that matched the blood type of several victims, further strengthening the case against Kürten. Faced with mounting evidence, investigators now had to build a case strong enough to convict the man who had so deftly eluded them. The net was tightening around Peter Kürten, the man known as the Vampire of Düsseldorf, whose reign of terror had held a city captive, was on the brink of being unmasked. Kürten's arrest in May 1930 marked the end of a reign of terror that had gripped Düsseldorf for more than a year. The evidence against him was compelling: the bloody handkerchief, the knife, and the testimony of Maria Buchholz, the brave young woman who'd survived his savage attack. Forensic science, still a fledgling field, had provided investigators with a crucial link between the killer and his crimes. Yet Kürten was far from a defeated man. Even under arrest, he was manipulative and cunning. He knew the legal system and understood that the police had to build a case that would stand up in court. He was confident, cocky even, as he awaited trial. His demeanor was so calm, so chillingly composed, that it seemed as if he was enjoying the spectacle, reveling in the attention. The public, meanwhile, was in a state of shock. The brutal crimes, the audacity of the killer, and the gruesome details that emerged during the investigation had all been deeply unsettling. Now, with the arrest, people began to feel a sense of relief. But there was also a morbid fascination, a collective need to understand what had driven this man to commit such monstrous acts. When the trial began in April 1931, the courtroom was packed. Reporters from all over Europe descended on Düsseldorf, turning the proceedings into a media circus. The public thirsted for every detail: the evidence, the testimonies, and above all, the accused's behavior. Kürten, for his part, seemed to enjoy the attention, often smiling and appearing unfazed by the charges against him. The trial was a meticulous, painstaking process. The prosecution presented a carefully constructed case, laying out the evidence piece by piece. The handkerchief, the knife, the fingerprint analysis, and Maria Buchholz's testimony all pointed to one man, Peter Kürten. But it was his wife, Auguste, whose testimony dealt the most significant blow. She confirmed that the items belonged to her husband and that she had turned them over to the police. Her testimony was a damning indictment of her husband, who sat impassive as his wife sealed his fate. The verdict came swiftly: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in applause, a collective sigh of relief echoing through the hallowed halls of justice. Peter Kürten, the Vampire of Düsseldorf, was sentenced to death. But even in the face of his impending execution, he remained unrepentant, his chillingly cold demeanor never wavering. The man who had terrorized a city, who had reveled in his monstrous acts, was finally facing the consequences of his horrific crimes. As the dust settled post-trial, the question that pervaded the air was, what could have possibly triggered such a monstrous transformation in Peter Kürten? To answer this, we must delve into the abyss of his psyche, the labyrinth of his motivations, past traumas, and psychological evaluations. Born into a poverty-stricken, abusive household, Kürten's upbringing was as dark as his heinous acts. His father, a violent alcoholic, regularly assaulted both Kürten and his mother. Young Kürten was exposed to horrific sexual violence from an early age, a traumatic past that psychologists believe played a significant role in shaping his future path. He began exhibiting signs of violent behavior and sexual deviation in his childhood, a clear indication of his troubled psyche. Kürten's psychological evaluations provide a more in-depth look into his deranged mind. Diagnosed as both a psychopath and a sadist, Kürten derived pleasure from the suffering of others. This condition, known as sadistic personality disorder, is characterized by a long-term pattern of cruel, demeaning, and violent behavior. His sadism reached such an extent that he confessed to experiencing sexual gratification from the sight of his victim's blood, a chilling detail that earned him the moniker, the Vampire of Düsseldorf. But what's even more horrifying is that Kürten was highly intelligent and manipulative, traits often associated with psychopathy. He was fully aware of his actions, yet he felt no regret or remorse. Instead, he reveled in them, basking in the fear and chaos he created. He meticulously planned his crimes, selecting his victims at random to avoid detection, demonstrating a chilling level of calculation and cold-bloodedness. Moreover, Kürten's motive wasn't confined to mere sadistic pleasure. He confessed to deriving a perverse satisfaction from the ensuing panic and terror that gripped the city after each of his killings. This obsession with power and control further attests to his psychopathic tendencies. In essence, Peter Kürten was a product of his traumatic past, a man whose psyche was irrevocably warped by the horrors he experienced. His penchant for violence, his sadistic tendencies, and his lack of empathy all coalesced into the monstrous figure he became. Yet these factors do not justify his actions, nor do they lessen the atrocities he committed. They merely provide a glimpse into the dark abyss that was Peter Kürten's mind, a chilling reminder of the depths to which the human psyche can descend when pushed beyond its limits. In the wake of Peter Kürten's arrest, trial, and subsequent execution, the city of Düsseldorf and its inhabitants were left to grapple with the horrifying reality of the terror that had gripped them. The Vampire of Düsseldorf had been a real, living individual, a man who had walked among them, preying on their most vulnerable. The collective trauma left a lasting mark on the community, forever altering the way they perceived safety and trust. Survivors of Kürten's brutal attacks and their families bore the most profound scars. They had come face to face with a monster, their lives forever tainted by the encounter. Their stories became a haunting reminder of the atrocities committed by the man they once thought was just another face in the crowd. The resilience and courage they displayed in the face of such adversity, however, served as a stark contrast to Kürten's brutality, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. The media, both local and international, played a pivotal role in the aftermath. Newspapers were filled with lurid details of Kürten's crimes, his trial, and his eventual execution. The public's fascination with the case was evident in the immense press coverage it received. However, this intense media focus also served to highlight the need for better understanding and treatment of mental disorders, sparking a dialogue that would pave the way for advancements in psychiatry and criminology. Kürten's case significantly influenced the field of forensic psychology. His psychological evaluations provided valuable insights into the mind of a psychopathic killer, contributing to the understanding of violent criminal behavior. His case became a reference point in criminology and forensic psychology, studied and analyzed by scholars and professionals worldwide. Peter Kürten's legacy is a dark one, marked by fear, violence, and death. Yet, in its aftermath, it brought about an increased awareness and understanding of the complexities of the human mind. The horrors unleashed by the Vampire of Düsseldorf served as a chilling reminder of the depths to which a human being can plunge when led by a warped psyche. But it also highlighted the resilience of those who survived his reign of terror, their strength a beacon of hope in the face of such darkness. In the exploration of Peter Kürten's life and crimes, there are threads left untied, questions unanswered, and implications that continue to linger. Despite the detailed confessions, the extensive psychological evaluations, and the wealth of media accounts, there remain aspects of Kürten's story that defy explanation. One such mystery revolves around the triggers of Kürten's violent behavior. Despite the consensus that his childhood played a significant role, the exact elements that transformed him into a serial killer remain elusive. Some experts propose a genetic predisposition towards violence, exacerbated by his upbringing. Others suggest that his violent tendencies were entirely a product of his environment. Without definitive evidence, however, these theories remain speculative. Another haunting question is how many victims truly fell to Kürten's hand. While he confessed to numerous murders, some of his claims were inconsistent, leading to doubt about the exact number of his victims. Some believe that Kürten, in his desire for notoriety, may have exaggerated his crimes, while others argue that there are likely victims whose stories remain untold. This uncertainty adds another chilling layer to the story of the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Perhaps the most haunting implication of Kürten's case is the realization that such monstrous behavior can reside beneath an ordinary facade. Kürten was not a creature of the night, but a man who walked among us, undetected and unsuspected. This truth shatters the illusion of safety, leaving us to wonder how many more like him might exist. The case of Peter Kürten serves as a grim reminder of the depths of human depravity. It underscores the urgent need for continued research into the roots of violent criminal behavior, the importance of early intervention in cases of child abuse, and the necessity of a justice system that is equipped to handle such extreme instances of criminality. As we reflect on the life and crimes of Peter Kürten, we are left with a chilling portrait of a man who reveled in violence, a stark testament of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul. His story, while deeply disturbing, also serves as a call to vigilance, a reminder of the importance of understanding the complexities of the human mind and the dire consequences when those complexities are left unchecked. The legacy of the Vampire of Düsseldorf is a dark one, but it is one that continues to shape our understanding of humanity's darkest corners. Thanks for listening. This has been Serial Killers with Ben Carter. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.